Today we're going to be reviewing my predictions, my previous predictions on who I thought were going to be, the most important players in the 2022 football season for the Texas Longhorns. A couple months ago, before the 2022 season started, I made a video, kind of predicting who I thought was going to be the most important. When making this list, the criteria for it pretty much was going to be, the idea behind it was the most important players, not necessarily the most talented, the most upside, but it was going to be whether it was important because depth, there wasn't necessarily people behind these guys, or, maybe a combination of depth and talent. So that's kind of the criteria behind this list. Today, we're going to go back through that list. There were six players total, 3 on offense, 3 on defense. We're going to go through and kind of see, who I hit really well and, who I maybe kind of missed on. But all that is coming up after this. What's going on, everyone? Welcome in. My name is Chris. This is Horns Behind Enemy Lines. It has been a while. It has been a minute since I've actually set up the camera and, been able to set up here and kind of talk. Life's been busy, man. Life has been really, really busy with, my job and everything. Things have been really busy there. A lot of stuff happening with the family. Cousin joining the Navy, all kinds of different things. So I've kind of been unable to keep up. I'm trying, so, bear with me here. But, so the 2022 season has officially wrapped up as of, a couple weeks ago. Texas lost to Washington, in the Valero Alamo Bowl. We may go through that game here in a little bit, but this specific video is for, going through and reviewing who the most important players were, kind of comparing it to what I predicted at the beginning of the season. And then, like I said, we might go through a little bit of a season review as well. So yeah, without further ado, man, let's get started. My first prediction, the first offensive guy that I predicted, there wasn't really any question about it. It was Bijan Robinson. No real hard guesses there. Bijan Robinson obviously being probably the most important player on the team. An outstanding season, outstanding career at Texas. Super happy for him that he's going to go on and continue his career in the league, and he's going to do great things there. This his junior season here at Texas, he kind of solidified himself as a top 5 rusher at the University of Texas. There were just so many times where Quinn, was struggling, and it was when in doubt, just hand it to Bijan. And there were times where Sark overthought it and we didn't run the ball. I think the biggest case of that happened in the Oklahoma State game that I was at. It was rough. It was just rough at points. And it was one of those things where Bijan was there a lot of times to bail us out of a lot of situations, man. So definitely I would say that we probably hit on Bijan. I probably hit on Bijan with that prediction. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Roschon Johnson here. Obviously I didn't predict him. But Roschon Johnson is somebody that I can't not talk about for a second. He is the definition of what it means to be a Texas Longhorn. We saw that with guys like Sam Ehlinger. We saw that with guys like Vince and Colt. All the guys who just exuded Longhorn energy. He's gonna go on and be an absolute sleeper in the draft. Whoever gets him is getting an absolute stud, a stellar leader, and just an all-around good dude. So again, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention him. Super happy for him in his career. He had a kind of a crazy career at Texas. He went through. He obviously got here with the Herman staff. And, he came in as a quarterback, said, I'll do whatever you need me to do, moved him to running back, and rest is history. Had himself a great career at Texas. So super happy for Roschon, Bijan as well, obviously. My next prediction for offense, this one was a little interesting, and Frankly, I would say I probably missed on it. The next one that I picked was Hayden Connor. That was my prediction at the beginning of the season, and the reason behind it being the whole offensive line as a whole was kind of a question mark at the beginning of the season. If you go back, the whole thing was kind of a question mark. It's kind of easy to say now, hey, yeah, what about Kelvin Banks? The problem was there, we just couldn't know for sure because he was a true freshman. The easy answer now, the most important player, at least on the offensive line this past year, probably Kelvin Banks. The reason behind my prediction of Hayden Connor was because he was kind of, him and probably at least Jake Majors were probably the most proven commodities on that offensive line at that current point. This was after spring ball when I made these predictions. This was after spring ball, so I believe this was after Junior Angelau got hurt at that point, and this was at that kind of awkward point where they were kind of looking at Hayden Connor at guard and at tackle. And he was kind of the reason behind that prediction was because he was kind of a Swiss Army knife. He was going to be kind of a plug and play kind of guy. At least that's what I had thought initially. But he struggled a little bit this year. I would say he was probably one of the more frankly, I would say he was one of the more bigger question marks on the team this year. And it was a little bit surprising, especially because last year he had done fairly well. Didn't do too bad at all his freshman year. We'll see going into the season. We'll see how he kind of holds up. The offensive line unit as a whole, going into the off season and spring ball and into the season, is going to be kind of interesting, especially because a guy like Christian Jones announced that he's coming back. Christian Jones probably being the most improved guy this past season. The 2021 season seemed to be struggling quite a bit. He struggled a lot, and granted, he was at that left tackle position. He was always kind of more suited for that right tackle position. Kelvin Banks came in and filled that left tackle role extremely well, especially for a true freshman. You quite literally probably couldn't have asked more out of him. It's going to be interesting. I think probably the only solidified guys right now you're probably only talking about Jake Majors and Kelvin Banks, and maybe probably Christian Jones as well, right there at that right tackle position. But the guards specifically are going to be interesting. Cole Hudson got hurt. We don't really know how long he's going to be out, and DJ Campbell, Devon Campbell, seeing how he kind of excels. I think it was in the Baylor game where he had to come in for Cole Hudson, and he kind of struggled there at the beginning. But he's a guy who's obviously ultra talented, 5-star guy coming out of high school. A lot of upside there. So we'll see how the offensive line plays out. But specifically Hayden Connor, with that pick, obviously I kind of missed on it. At least I would say I think I missed on it. The third guy, this is probably maybe the most interesting one. Third guy that I predicted at the beginning of the season was Xavier Worthy. Yeah, so that's a situation where we are quite literally just going to have to see what happens. Was it a sophomore slump? I don't know. I think one of the things that he really, really has to work on in his game is his hands and, ball tracking, his ball skills. His route running is great. But, I think it was definitely established this past year that he's not necessarily the deep threat that everybody kind of thought he was, at least at this current moment. And it showed a lot during the games. And it's not all on him. Don't get me wrong here. Quinn had his growing pains. The Oklahoma State game, granted, again, I go back to a couple minutes ago. I don't know why we had him throw the ball 49 times. That's a different conversation, though. That's a different conversation. But it seemed to be that Quinn was just missing a lot of times, but you fast forward all the way to this past Washington game. Not much more Quinn could have done. Quinn actually had himself a really good game. We'll talk a little bit more about Quinn probably towards the end of the video. But as far as Xavier Worthy goes, it's hard to say. It's honestly kind of hard to say if I missed on him, because when you kind of sit there and think about it, who else was really going to fill that role though? It was kind of one of those things where, the criteria for when I was filming this was, maybe not necessarily the best player or the most, the most talented or what have you. It was who is the most important, whether it be, hey, we absolutely need this guy because of depth. We really don't have anybody behind him. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit more as it pertains to defense. We still have the defense to go over. But, the issues that this offense was kind of having this past year, whether it be the scheme, Sark not scheming guys like Jordan Whittington, guys like Jatavian Sanders, not scheming them open enough. I think we saw a beautiful version of it in the OU game against Oklahoma, and then it kind of was spotty from that point on. I liked the scheme in the Washington game. I really, really did. You kind of saw Quinn kind of get really comfortable, fall kind of into his own in that game a little bit. But as far as Xavier Worthy goes, it's hard to say. It's very much going to be one of those things where we're just going to have to see. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Jordan Whittington coming back, returning, which is huge, man. Huge. Kind of surprising, but apparently Jordan Whittington coming back is a little bit of a controversial topic. I don't necessarily see that, especially with a guy like Jordan Whittington. Yeah, he's got the injury history, but he stayed healthy this whole past year, man. And when he did have the ball in his hands, he was dangerous. He was really dangerous. I think it's a matter of Sark having to scheme him open and Quinn making the right reads and whatnot. So I'm really excited that Jordan Whittington is coming back. I'm interested to see how Xavier Worthy does. You want to see him step it up. Frankly, he's got to step it up. It's going to be big getting Isaiah Nair back. Hopefully, I don't know what the timeline is. I'm not sure if anybody knows exactly what the timeline is, but getting Isaiah Nair back is a big thing, especially a guy like that. Xavier Worthy not being the biggest guy around, 6'1", maybe 170, 180. I don't even think he's 180. Isaiah Nair being 6'3", to bigger frame, bigger catch radius kind of guy, but also he doesn't necessarily lack athleticism or speed either. I think that was, everybody knows this. We missed him. We just missed him this past year. We really could have used him. We frankly could have used him a lot this year. Whether it be on as a deep threat, as a jump ball guy, 50-50 guy. Could have used him. We really, really could have used him. Getting him back is going to be interesting, and definitely a plus. And then, right now, the hot name that's floating around right now is A.D. Mitchell, the wide receiver transfer from Georgia. A very loaded room at wide receiver, guys. Very loaded. When you talk about the people that are already there, you talk about the freshmen that just got there. And I know we're kind of getting off track here, but this is all, we're kind of getting off track here, but I haven't uploaded in a while. We'll kind of make this a little bit of a longer video, but you talk about DeAndre Moore, Jonte Cook, who's my personal favorite, receiver in the class. Jonte Cook, absolute beast, Ryan Niblett. And the guys who were there, the guys who were true freshmen this past year, Savion Red, Brennan Thompson. It's going to be interesting, man. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how they juggle that, especially when you toss in the return of Isaiah Nair. Really interesting, specifically, again, going full circle back to Xavier Worthy. We're just going to have to see. Again, you want to see improvement. You have to see improvement. Work on his hands a little bit, work on ball track. Just get back to the basics, man. Back to the basics, not letting your eyes, get, because, in that second massive drop that he had down the seam, it was very much a thing where he was just looking forward before he secured the ball. It's middle school stuff. It's high school stuff that you teach. He's just got to get back to the fundamentals, and hopefully we can get him, because at the end of the day, talking about a beast in Xavier Worthy, man. Just straight athleticism. One of the fastest guys on the team. One of the best route runners on the team. You'd love to see him. You'd love to see him flourish, man, but we just have to. He's got a little bit of work ahead of him, so we'll see how that pans out. Moving it on over to defense now. I'm going to go ahead and say that I definitely hit on this one, and this is a guy that I've been high on since the end of last year, is Jaylan Ford. And this was a little bit of two things. One, because I really believed in him. You know, I'm just a Jaylan Ford guy. I was banging this drum at the beginning of the season before the season started, like way into the off season of last year. But you know, the other reason being with this year specifically was depth. We didn't have a lot of depth at linebacker, and you could see that in the recruiting class that we just pulled. When you talk about Anthony Hill, Darian Gillette, Cecilia Kana, all those guys, all those linebackers or linebacker types that we pulled, in recruiting, we're really thin at linebacker. We were really thin at linebacker going into the season, which is why we pulled a guy like Diamante Tucker Dorsey out of the portal from James Madison. We had, David Benda, DeMarvion Overshone, and all that, but specifically in terms of that Mike linebacker position, there really was not a lot. So again, one of those things where he was important because he was really one of the only guys there. I also happen to think he was just a beast, and it definitely came to fruition. He came up for us big tons of times throughout this season. He really seriously stepped up. Shout out to Jeff Choate and Pete Kwiatkowski for getting those guys right. Really happy for Jaylan Ford. He just announced his return a couple days ago. He's announced that he's coming back for this season. It's going to be big. We need him. We definitely need him. It's going to be cool to see how they kind of balance the depth. You got to expect that we're going to at least see Anthony Hill, massive 5-star guy coming out of Denton Ryan. You gotta think we're going to see a lot of him alongside Jaylan Ford. I don't know if we're going to see him in that will linebacker position, kind of filling the spot of DeMarvion Overshone. But as far as Jaylan Ford goes, not a lot needs to be said. Definitely was one of the more important players on the defense, if not the most important player on the defense this past season. Next guy this is a little bit of an interesting one, but I predicted my other guy was DeMarvion Overshone. And this was kind of a tough one. I would almost be... He didn't have a bad season by any stretch of the imagination. He actually had a really good season. He had a pretty good season. I think looking back on the season, I think there were other people that I would probably put in front of him in terms of most important. My last guy that I'm going to mention, kind of spoiler alert, he's a defensive back, so I didn't even mention a defensive lineman, which maybe I should have. I probably should have gone all three levels, but looking back on it, could probably put a guy like Keandre Coburn, maybe Tavondre Sweat in this conversation. For this conversation specifically, again, nothing really against DeMarvion Overshone. Really happy for him, in his career at Texas. Pretty long career. I think he was class of 2018. So he's been around for a while. Obviously, he started off as a safety back when he was rocking the number 31. Back before the whole Agent Zero thing. He was rocking the safety position for a while, and and then they moved him to the linebacker position, and he had himself a pretty good season this year. There were times where he would kind of seem to disappear a little bit. One of the knocks on him is just his size. He's not, frankly, he's not linebacker size. He put on, which is crazy because this past off season, going into this season, he put on a ton of weight. He got really big and all that, but he still doesn't have that typical linebacker frame. He came up big for us in situations, though, especially when it comes to playing the flats and the screen game and whatnot. He's really good at sifting through all that. The knock on him is kind of making his fits in the run game and whatnot. But I would go so far as to say for this particular conversation, I would move a guy like Keandre Coburn or T'Vondre Sweat into the conversation. Frankly, it's just a testament to how well our defensive line played this year, which they did. They did really, really well. Games that obviously stick out are the Alabama game, TCU game. Interested to see how we're going to fill those holes going into the offseason. Moro Ojimo announced he's going to the draft. Keandre Coburn's going into the draft. The last guy here that I'll talk about that I predicted was Jahdae Barron, and I would probably go so far as to say that, yeah, I kind of hit on this one. Not necessarily a crazy outlandish pick. I think a lot of people already knew about Jahdae, but he had a really good season. They kind of had him really rocking that nickel position, that fifth defensive back position there. So to kind of start the season, it was a little weird to see how they were juggling the depth there. We saw a lot of Jalen Gilbo to start the season, but after he got hurt, I want to say, was it in the Oklahoma State? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I can't remember exactly when Jalen Gilbo got hurt, but after that point, it was Jahdae Barron for the rest, and he had an outstanding season. I'm happy he's going to be back. I don't know if he officially announced it, but he'll be back for this season. And as far as defensive backs go, that's going to be a really interesting conversation because Ryan Watts, this is more corner conversation, but Ryan Watts, had a pretty good season this past year. Obviously, the transfer from Ohio State. You got to imagine he's got his position, that position specifically, locked down. In the Washington game, in the bowl game at the Alamo Bowl, we saw Terrence Brooks flourish, man. He had a really good game. He kind of, there were several times where he got the ball thrown his way, and it was just clamps. It was no fly zone for sure for the true freshman. So really excited to see how he does, specifically Terrence Brooks, how he does. Because they did bring in the Wake Forest transfer, Gavin Holmes. We'll see how that goes. And then as far as the safeties goes, obviously Anthony Cook, I believe, is going to be moving on. Jaron Thompson is going to be coming back. Kind of your leader maybe in that, at least in that defensive back room. The massive name coming out of the transfer portal, transferring to Texas is Jalen Catalon, the safety transfer from Arkansas, who Texas actually saw last year, not this past year, but 2021. They saw when we played Arkansas, and that was somebody who obviously we missed on when it came to recruiting. Lo and behold, he ends up at Texas, out of the transfer portal. A couple years later, massive name, with the caveat, if he stays healthy. Okay, that's one of the big things, and most people know this. This is one of the big things is, his health has kind of been a question mark. He seems to, sometimes he's not always healthy. Staying healthy is kind of one of the things he struggled with. We'll see how that goes. Regardless, the thing is, when he's healthy, the dude is a beast, man. The dude is an absolute beast. Filling the role of Anthony Cook, who did pretty well in his own right this past year. I think he's definitely going to fill that role really well. Again, we're getting off on a tangent here, but going all the way back around to Jahdae Barron, having him back is going to be massive. Working in Jalen Gilbo is going to be interesting too, because that's a guy who picked things up really, really, really fast. He was only a true freshman, and he was seeing snaps, in game one. I can't remember if he was named officially the starter initially. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But I'm going to be interested to specifically Jalen Gilbo, how they work him in, because of such a proven commodity like Jahdae Barron. Or that was at least the 3 predictions, or the 6 predictions, and if we missed, if we hit on them, just to go back through. The predictions were Bijan, Hayden Connor, and Xavier Worthy on offense, and then on defense it was Jalen Ford, DeMarvion Overshone, and Jahdae. I think I did pretty well. I definitely whiffed on at least 1 or 2 of them. But overall, definitely, I was pretty confident in those picks. Barring injury. at the beginning of the season. As far as the season goes, a couple things that we'll kind of talk about, kind of shifting gears here into a little bit more of a season review. I think the first thing that I'll kind of talk about here is the quarterbacks, is Quinn specifically, and by and large, I'm actually pretty happy with where he's at. Not necessarily, I wouldn't go so far as to say that I'm comfortable or that that I'm confident. At least where he left off in that Washington game. Especially all throughout that game. This is what bothered me. All throughout that game, specifically on Twitter, and Twitter is a crazy place, but he was catching a lot of hate, a lot of unnecessary hate, all throughout that Washington game, and he did well during that game. I don't care who you are, he did really, really well during that game. You eliminate some really big drops. He's looking at a massive game. Game of the year obviously is we're probably talking about the Red River, against OU. He had an outstanding game. But we got to talk about the struggles. Oklahoma State, I was there. It was rough. And again, we kind of go back to scheme. I don't know why we stopped running the ball during that game. Furthermore, I don't know why we threw the ball 49 times. It's, something that still keeps me up at night. But definitely struggled against Oklahoma State. He struggled against Iowa State a little bit as well. A couple massive, the Casey Kane drop was also a big thing there. But that was kind of the offense as a whole in that Iowa State game. It wasn't until halftime, second half, when we just started feeding Bijan, and the rest was history. But to be fair, later on in that game, Quinn did have that pretty clutch, red zone goal line play to Xavier Worthy, where he ran, Xavier ran that little whip route, outstanding route, and a great throw as well. This is a conversation that, to the casual fan, to the average, viewer, people that, aren't Texas fans, frankly, the big thing is Arch Manning. The big thing is, Arch isn't going to want to sit. It's, he's going to come steal Quinn's spot. I, for many reasons, don't think that that's going to happen. I think and we can talk about Arch here in a second, but, the whole the whole kind of toxic politics conversation comes in, where, would he put Arch in before he put Malik in? I think the right answer is no. I think Malik is somebody who, Malik had a year. He's had a year to kind of get comfortable. He had to rework a lot of his mechanics. A very, very raw quarterback, ultra talented coming out of high school, but he had some mechanical things that he had to work on. And he also struggled with injuries, at least towards the beginning before the season started. So that kind of set him back a little bit. But I think the job is Quinn's, at least for the time being. But the dude is going to have to work. The dude is going to have to prove himself. Frankly, realistically, Malik does need to get the look. Not necessarily getting first team reps, but I think a fair assessment between Quinn and Malik does need to be had, because the fact is, Malik is a beast, man. The intangibles are insane there. The intangibles, when you talk about the arm strength, how he's built, his size and everything, the dude's gonna be an NFL quarterback for sure. The question is where he's gonna fit in. That's all remained to be seen. As far as Arch Manning goes, it's kind of funny that we still have to have this conversation. Arch himself, the family, it's been widely reported, they don't really want him to see first year snaps, or at least, starting snaps if he doesn't have to. Development is a big thing, man. Getting cast into the fire, especially as a quarterback, really young, can be pretty detrimental. For some it can be good, but for a lot it can be kind of bad. And you can't learn it. For a lot of people, you can't learn anything. I think the big thing with Arch is letting him sit back and soak in every ounce that he possibly can. Especially from a guy like Sark, especially even coaches like AJ Milwee. I don't think, I wouldn't be surprised if we see maybe a little bit of Arch, at least next year in games and whatnot. Maybe if we end up killing a team, but I think the Arch Manning conversation is about a year away. Frankly, I think most people who are dialed in, most of you probably know that the Arch Manning conversation is frankly probably more of a year away. I think again, the job is Quinn's. I think that's fair, but a fair assessment does need to be had. Will it happen? I don't know. Frankly, I don't know. I would like to think that Sark is going to take a step back and assess everything and, give Malik a fair chance, at least give him a fair look, as well as, making sure Quinn is actually progressing, making sure he's actually, studying and learning the game, as he should. So the season overall, obviously the Horns finish 8-4, 8-5, counting the bowl loss. It's better than 5-7 for sure. I think 8-4 was kind of most people's prediction. Most people who were looking at it, objectively. I think 8-4 was the consensus. What most people thought was going to happen. At least this season specifically. This season, for me, the way I look at it, I wouldn't go so far as to say it was a flat out disappointment. I think there were some very, very extremely disappointing losses, though, because of the inconsistencies that this team showed. When you look at our defensive play in the TCU game, right? And we simply couldn't get anything going on offense, though, and we didn't capitalize on our defense playing amazingly. We're talking about beating TCU and, from that point, keep going and potentially playing for a Big 12 championship. But I think the loss that just irks me the most, and maybe it was because I was there, but the Oklahoma State game, and this is something that my dad and I talk about nonstop. But when you look at the reality of what Oklahoma State was, and especially more so when you look at what they weren't, that loss hurts a lot. That loss stings a lot. Okay, that is a game that we had absolutely no business losing. To that defense, specifically to that defense, that loss, that was probably the absolute worst loss of the season. The Tech loss was frustrating. The Tech loss was just frustrating. We just didn't have an answer for Donovan Smith. That was just frustrating. The Bama game was great. For the most part, you obviously you would have liked to have come out of there with a win. And the TCU game, our defense played so well. So, but that TCU team, frankly, even though they got, splattered in the championship, that was still a pretty good team, with really good specific guys. Max Duggan had himself a pretty good season. Specifically, Quentin Johnston had himself an outstanding career at TCU. So that loss specifically doesn't doesn't, I can kind of live with that loss, even though it still irks me that we couldn't get our offense going. You know, last year, the defense was a big question mark, massive question mark. And I feel, even after losing a lot of people on defense, I feel confident. I feel more confident for sure about our defense, which is funny, which is when you think about it, which is really funny thinking about where we were, where, you know, as fans, where our mentality was to start the season. You talk about the firepower that we had on offense, you know, all the names, I don't even need to mention them, all the names that we have on offense, and we were like, oh, offense will be cool. Defense, though, it's a little questionable. And don't get me wrong, defense this year did have its moments, but, you know, I really am. I'm happy with our defense. Offense, we'll see. I do think our offense is going to be overall improved. You know, one of the really interesting things that I'm going to be looking at is the running back room, obviously. You know, guys like Jonathan Brooks stepping up, and true freshman Cedric Baxter coming in too. But you know, going into the off season, I'm gonna try to kind of keep up with the content a little bit better. Again, it is kind of tough for me sometimes with work and whatnot. Cool thing is that the drama kind of never stops when you talk about the transfer portal. The drama just never really stops. So but that is gonna do it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to like this video, leave a thumbs up down below, and subscribe while you're there. And be sure to find me on Twitter at @EnemyHorns. I'll put that on the screen for you somewhere on here. You know, I'm on Twitter quite a bit as well. But other than that, guys, we will see you in the next one. Hook 'em.